Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the American University Museum at the Katzen Art Center. My favorite model for how to create exhibitions comes from 1969 when Walter Hopps turned the Corcoran over to 3 artists, basically not knowing quite what they were going to do, but giving them the time to work in the space and to create something together that turned out to be pretty important. That's Gilliam Krebs McGowan. We only have 2 artists, but we do have 2 great artists, and we don't have Walter Hopps, but we have better. So anyway, I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say about the show. You can imagine it was a leap of faith, I think, is how I guess I would term, not, leap of faith, yeah, keep it positive. And I was pleasantly surprised every step of the way. So would you like to take it away?
Yes. Thank you all for coming today. Welcome to the Human Flood. I'm Laura Roulet, the curator who had the pleasure of working with Ellyn Weiss and Sondra Arkin. They just shared that they met decades ago at Artomatic. Yay! Which is currently up in a new location, and we encourage you all to see that as well. They have been collaborating on this exhibit for several years, and we're going to talk about that collaboration, but this wasn't the first time that they have worked together. So I was interested in learning about a series of group exhibits that you jointly curated called the Zeitgeist. And that to me seems to bring together your commitment to community and also to urgent issues of a variety of sources and in many areas. Can you talk a little bit about that series?
I'm really happy you asked about Zeitgeist, because the man who gave us his gallery for the very first one is here, Nevin Kelly. The Nevin Kelly Gallery on U Street is where we did the first Zeitgeist show. Zeitgeist is, I translate it as sort of the moment, in the moment. It's a German word. And I think we conceived it even from the very beginning as a series, first of a series, about a topic that seemed to be really in the air at the moment that we, conceived of the show. And the first one was Under Surveillance. What year was it? Do you remember? Nevin, do you remember what year it was?
It was 2006.
And we selected about 12 artists. We just asked each of them to make a piece responsive to that. And it was great. And that was the first one, and we were off, and why don't you take it from there?
When I was describing the human flood to someone earlier this year, Ellyn and I had been working on the work for a couple of years already. I'm Sondra Arkin, by the way, in case you don't know me. And I had explained to the person that I felt that what we were doing was a Zeitgeist show, but we didn't invite anybody else. Because we were addressing an issue that was really important to us and we thought was of the moment, and we wanted to bring more attention to this idea of mass migration caused by climate change. And we kept having to unravel that topic from all of the other social justice issues that it ends up getting wound up in. I think that Laura and Ellyn both had to say to me at different times, it's not about homelessness or it's not about food insecurity. And we brought the idea of humans and people and the idea of home into the show. And then concurrently, we wanted to have a lot of different ways for individuals to access the work. So we ended up doing the same thing that we would do in a Zeitgeist show, which is mixing lots of different kinds of media in a very large installation that had a lot of variety and a lot of ways for people to access the topic.
So that brings up the sort of series of many exhibits that artists are working on involving climate change. It's a huge issue. It's very difficult, I think, for most people to really comprehend. And so artists are coming up with many really fascinating ways of approaching this in a way that helps people to comprehend something that is much bigger than we are. It's global, it's no end in sight, no real solutions, and yet we are dealing with it every single day. So their approach in this exhibit, The Human Flood, is to really focus on the humanitarian side of climate change, climate justice, climate refugees, and I think that it evolved quite a bit over time. So maybe you can talk a little bit about sort of your collaboration and how your thinking changed as you were working on this.
If you don't mind, I'll put this a little bit into context.
Mm-hmm.
This is the 5th climate change installation that I have done in collaboration with other artists since 2014. Yeah, for the last 10 years. Sondra was my collaborator, genius collaborator for the last 2. But they started with a show called Voyage to Discovery which was mounted at the American Association for the Advancement of Science downtown, DC. And it was about imagining a trip to just the liminal space at the North Pole, the pole, exactly where the ice is receding. And the question I posed to myself is, what is being revealed as the ice that's been there for millennia is melting? And so for my piece, I envisioned some strange little sculptural things that I imagined to be the creatures that had been under the ice for thousands of years. And what a challenge they posed to us, because we don't know anything about them. Are they benign, or are they indifferent, or are they malign, and are they dangerous? And like everything else about climate change, we can't stop it. We can't stop them coming back into our world. This show, so each of the other 4 shows is more about effects and technologies, and to provoke thought about how can we address climate change? How can we stop it or reverse it or slow it? And this one is different. This one's about the people. This one's about the humans who have been set on the road because the places where they managed to eke out generally a subsistence living, are no longer capable of doing that because of drought or flood or heat or whatever the climate catastrophes that have been set into motion. And this is a challenge to us in the northern world who've set this migration in motion, to accept the humanity of the people on the road. Let me turn it over to you.
So the question of how the collaboration comes about. In the past, when we've done collaborations, we very much do a divide and conquer. You do this, I do that, I'm going to work over in that corner, you work over in this corner. And this show was very different. We started off with the concept that we wanted to work together. And I felt very strongly personally, I can't speak for Ellen, but I felt like it's very hard for me to imagine what someone else is going to create. And when someone is working on a piece that's separate from mine, I couldn't really imagine how they might approach a problem. And so we went into this with this idea that we were going to create the work together. And I would say it took almost the first year for us to stop talking. We would come up with ideas and discard them. A lot of the original ideas did have to do with climate or weather or the environment. And as we moved along and started making some things, it became apparently clear to both of us that we had to have people. And I have to say, for me, that was a huge struggle. I don't work representationally in any way, and I really resisted the idea of working with people myself, and so maybe there was some divide and conquer in that respect. Ellen really started with the people more than I did, and I was later to come with making actual people in the work. And we did a 2-week residency at a printmaking studio in Massachusetts, where we lived in an apartment together and we worked every day on some prints.
And ate lentils every night.
Ate lentils several nights a week.
A lot of lentils were involved.
I cook. We found working that Ellen is much more improvisational than I am and much more able to jump off cliffs. And so she held my hand and we jumped together, I think, in a lot of it. And we worked on a series of prints and came back and then struggled again with a lot of the work that we were doing and said, why don't we do more prints? We loved making the prints together. We should just make more prints. So we had a press here in DC, and we made more prints there, and then decided that the print residencies really worked for us. Because in all of the ways that our aesthetics aren't the same, our work hours aren't the same. So a residency sort of forces us to be together in a different kind of way than we're able to do out of our own studios. I guess we'll talk about individual pieces, but the print series that you see along 4 walls in this inside gallery space is one piece called The Human Flood, and it's 85 or so prints, and they are all done collaboratively. So they pretty much have all of our fingerprints on them.
Just to go into detail a little bit about the figurative side, you made the decision not to focus on either domestic or international refugees, and to create figures that are kind of ethnically ambiguous. Can you talk a little bit more about how you decided to depict these humans?
Yeah, I credit Sondra with being very focused on conveying the message that this could be you, whoever you are. This could be you. It's not only limited to people in certain parts of the world or people of certain skin tones. And, so we made a decision in making the prints as well as the people in the windows and the people on the scrims, which I'm sure you'll notice if you spend some time. There are recurring images in all of those. To the extent that we could, remove markers of racial and ethnic identity. To sort of remove triggers of fear as much as we could, anyway. And stress the common humanity, the the humanity of all the people.
I agree. It was extremely important to me that it could be you was conveyed, not just because of, it was partly because we felt that there was a real need to create empathy in this program and in what we were doing with this project. But I think that it's very easy for individuals to think that this is not a problem that they have to focus on if they don't think it could be them. And the other thing I think that came about in the people being representative of just humans was also this idea of transparency. So as we evolved the work, we decided in the printmaking that you'll see that some of the prints are done on Mylar and they overlap other prints. And when we decided to work on the Scrim series, it was a matter of having something that would create this idea of transparency where you could see through it, but we didn't want you to see through it. And then that was emphasized even more by the windows, this idea that you could look right through people if you didn't pay attention to them.
Sondra, can you also talk a little bit about the video, audio component?
At some point, I don't know, I decided that I wanted to do a video for this project, and and that I didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't really want to collaborate on it. I have to be honest. Although I did collaborate with a number of people who helped me along the way, but I felt that we needed to have context for the show that really would explain that this wasn't about being xenophobic, and it wasn't about being afraid, and that it was about the humanity. And started working on gathering the images, and the digital piece is turned off now, but we'll turn it on again after the talk. And started gathering the imagery together, and then again in our conversations with Laura, it's actually a funny story. I said to Ellen one day, I really think we need to do an audio piece to go with the digital imagery. We need to have people telling a story, to have stories where they would understand what you would be leaving behind. If you had to leave your house, what would you be leaving behind? Or if you had to leave the place that you always lived in, what would you be leaving behind? Or what would you be going towards? But don't tell Laura, because she will make us do it. And then the next day we met with Laura, and I said, Laura, we're going to do this audio piece. And she said, you must. And so we talked about that and how we would do that piece. And so I do urge you, if you have time after we're done talking, it's a 10-minute about loop, 9 minutes and 57-second loop of 5 stories. You can also access them from our website. We have a website, The Human Flood, and the audio is linked in our website. So if you don't have a chance to listen to it here, that's a good opportunity to listen to it.
I agree that stories are important, and listening to the curator's input is very important. One thing that I love about the way that the exhibit ended up coming together is that you're using a lot of different formal languages. So you're also using abstraction, you're using sculpture, you're using installation. It is indoors, it is outdoors. Partly it evolved in the course of putting the exhibit together. But can you talk about sort of that evolution?
I'm trying to kind of really remember everything. You know, Sondra described how the prints just kept growing and growing and growing because they were so satisfying to make. I mean, we would literally be in the print shop together, what comes next, you know, and decide that together. The scrims were pretty early on, and that was reinforced by the fact that we knew we had this space here when you first walk in there where we could hang them. Oh, let me tell you a story about these. You'll see when you come around the corner. That curved wall on the inside has work that was done by me and work that was done by Sondra, and it's obvious which is which if you know anything about us, but the big, long paper pieces were ghost images of the scrims that I made. We made the scrims in the summertime where we do not occupy the same physical space. So we traded images back and forth, and Sondra can tell a story of how she was really surprised that they worked together when we finally put them together. So my husband, who's here, went out and bought a 4x8 sheet of plywood because I couldn't, these are so big I really couldn't work on them in my studio. And at least the one, my summer studio, and we brought them into the living room, this big wooden panel, and I first covered it with pieces from the cheapest possible, really, paper roll that I had, and we taped that down, and then we taped the scrims down, which are just like the cheapest window curtains, window curtain liners, really, that you can buy. Tape that over it, made the piece on top, and when I peeled that back, the paper one was underneath as a ghost image, and it was fabulous. So I called Sondra and said, "Oh, well, we got some more stuff for the show," and just continued to make them over the summer. I don't think that was responsive to your question, but I'm looking right at it, so I had to tell that story. I'm done.
Sondra, do you want to talk more about the sculptural side?
Sure. I also want to say that one of the other rules we sort of set for ourselves at the beginning of this show was that we wanted to use as little new materials as possible. It was very important to us, it's very important to me that part of the problem, when we talk about who's responsible for the situation we're in now, I believe that consumption is part of the problem, and that we consume way too much, and we are not very thoughtful about how we consume. So we decided that we wanted to use what we had on hand to make all of the work in this project. And so, embarrassingly, actually, a lot of this is stuff right out of our studios. All the paper that you see on the print is all very different because it comes out of flat files. And over the course of the past few years, we had a number of friends move, and so we ended up with a lot of materials from their moves or cleaning out attics and things like that. And in looking at this work, when you look at the different ways that Ellyn and I might approach work on a normal basis, is a lot of the work that I do deals with multiples and very much repetitive work, and within 10 minutes, Ellyn's like, "I'm done with doing this again and again and again." And I'm like, "Wait, I can do this for 3 weeks." So that's a difference in the way we work. So there were a number of pieces that we were thinking about making that would be these multiples. And so outside, we knew that we wanted to create refugee camps. And we were asked by the university not to make them full size, not to make tents that people could crawl into, because the sculpture garden is actually open to the public on the other side. Yeah, they didn't want to have people move in. And I mean, it is a university, so who knows who goes in and does what to the sculpture that's out there. And as we both worked with the different forms, Ellyn gravitated more to these dome-like structures that people might make when they're on the move themselves. And I determined that I wanted to make something that was much more like the kind of refugee camp that the NGOs put up and that people are living in for decades, where we're providing this solution for them, but they live there for decades. And we're not really providing a kind of solution that moves them into housing and an occupation that makes better sense. So we created the sculpture on the outside that's how that came about. And they're all made out of repurposed materials. The tents are sewn out of event banners from either party events or the Smithsonian. I got some from there. And they're made using the least amount of materials that we could. In that case, there's a reclaimed lathing used in them, but the least amount of raw materials. The sculpture that's between the inside gallery and the outside space, these sandbags or body bags, however you want to look at these when you go around, they're t-shirts also reclaimed from an event, and they're filled with pillows. And the pillows that are new that are in there will pass on to migrants or people or homeless, people who need pillows. We'll figure out a way for them to get repurposed. But it has to do with this idea that we are trying to keep a problem away with sort of a temporary patch. It has to do with why these body bags are stacked up that way.
What about your house?
Well, the house, so in the back side of the exhibit, when you go around the corner, there's I call it the trash house, which I probably shouldn't call it that. It's called Clear Consumption, and it is made out of produce containers and shredded financial documents and also reclaimed lathing wood. And this house represents this idea. It's made out of something that we transport around the world, vegetables that are precious to us. These financial documents are a remnant of the power that is responsible for this problem. And the house itself is a shaky, temporary, insubstantial solution.
Excellent. They're Sondra's financial documents, FYI.
They could be your financial documents.
They could be yours.
The other piece to that is, what do we hold precious? And every one of you out there, I'm sure, has a box somewhere in your house of financial documents that you're holding on to for some reason, because we're meant to believe that these financial documents are important and precious. And when we're done with them, we shred them.
There are warehouses full of them everywhere.
Right, the symbolism of financial documents. To me, the house feels like it represents the precarity of existence. And just, it feels fragile, but it's also familiar. And it just fits in well with the kind of recognition of our domestic existence and how precarious and fragile that could be. I also wanted to talk about, as we were talking and thinking about using this incredible space, using the height of the gallery, using the outdoor space, and connecting the indoors and the outdoors. One thing that we did is remove the screens that would cover the windows, if you've been in this gallery before, to create a connection between the tent camps outside and the prints and the other objects on the inside. So the vinyl was kind of late in the process, and I wonder if Ellyn wanted to talk about sort of how you decided what to put on the vinyl, how to use the liminal space and the transparency of being indoors, outdoors, whether you're looking out, whether you're outside looking in, how it connects the whole exhibit.
Okay. FYI, when you go outside, you'll see that actually this whole curving wall is glass. It's just one panel after another of glass, and these solid walls are temporary walls that the museum put up, a long time ago to show art. Really, it's not ideal for a museum space to have walls of complete glass. But they did leave these open, covered with very big, sturdy screens. So when I saw those, I said, we got to get those off. Because the idea is to create the connection, to show that we're not different. You know, right outside this transparent wall are other human beings, and they want to be with us, or they want what we have, they want. And so I'll talk about how we collaborated on those. I did the drawings, and I did them, on little bitty 11 by 17 paper ink on white paper. And then most of the drawings are one or two people. And we digitized them, and Sondra worked her magic with the internet stuff. With the digital stuff, with Photoshop, and grouped them together. You know, we collaborated on what the groups should look like. And then we sent the images to Chrome Dodge, which is a fabulous, fabulous service bureau in DC, pretty much the only man standing, and they're really, really good. And they blew them up to the size we told them to, and they printed them on vinyl and came to the museum and fixed them on the windows. So actually, they're not on the windows, they're on vinyl, and they'll hopefully be removable. At the end, I mean, now I have someone who really wants to buy a couple of them, so I'm hoping they come off.
Oops.
Oops.
Well, I would actually say that I wouldn't say that it was as late an addition as it might have seemed in the production of it, because we had actually talked to the museum at the very beginning about removing these walls completely so that we could put images along all of the windows, and that was not going to happen. But we did end up using the windows that go out to the sculpture garden, because to get to the sculpture garden, if you don't know, you need to go out of the museum and along the corridor, and there's a door to the side that leads you to this area.
Don't miss the shadows.
Don't miss the shadows, because the sun's coming. And I think that the other thing that was an unintended consequence is when you look at these people and this sculpture garden, it provides this bizarre prison wall around the sculpture garden. And when we have some photographs, they're not as apparent now, but when we first brought some of the tents here over last summer to test how it worked and to do some pre-photographs for promotion, we had set some tents up, and someone during the course of COVID had hash marked the walls with these red hash marks, 5, 10, 15, 20, and it just happened that we put the tents in front of those hash marks and did these photographs, and I felt that whole idea of the prison wall and the containment and the time passing along with the tents was really very profound. And it was, as many things have been in the course of making this work, unexpected pleasure, where something happened that we didn't expect it to happen.
Well, thinking of unexpected pleasures and events, I've just done a couple of tours with people through the gallery, and I'm always really interested to hear what associations people make with Gaza, with our border situation, but also with historic events. So refugee situations are, as old as mankind. I wonder if you wanted to share any stories or reactions that you've heard that, kind of surprised or delighted you.
Well, yeah, I would say a lot of people, when they first walk in, a couple of these tours several people said, oh my gosh, it's about Gaza. But also, on the couple of times that I've gone through with those tours, there have always been at least one person who is an immigrant. And I mean, there was a woman who cried looking at some of those prints. It was so moving for her, and that was so moving for me. I don't know whether you've had any of that too, but yeah, it's a universal, for Americans especially, it's a universal story.
It is a universal story, but it's also interesting to me that in all of our conversations and our going back and forth on what we wanted to do, we really tried not to look back too much. Ellyn worked, a couple of years ago, we worked on a collaborative project. A lot of people who are artists here also worked on the One House project that Ellyn was one of the spearheaders of, if that's the right word. And the One House project was, everyone did a 12 by 12 panel that had to do with somehow their heritage and coming to the United States. And in doing this project, there were a couple of times when Ellyn said, oh, well, I really want to do Russian immigrants, and I would steer her to another direction, to be honest. And it was important that and then the Ukraine war started actually in the course of this, and it was like, well, okay, you could include Eastern European refugees on the move now, but in wanting to stay close to the climate change issue, that wasn't where we were seeing the migration, so trying to keep our humans, again, a little bit away from historical context, we did, but we have had a lot of people talk to us about the different things that move them in the show, and I think that the installation Humans Past here, where we have these objects on the ground, the suitcases, the shoes, people have been really moved by that, especially the children's shoes.
I think we have a little time. Let's do one more question and then we'll open it up to you all. So thinking about the One House project, which I got involved with as well, it was really a wonderfully collaborative project where it was sort of like the AIDS quilt idea, that each person was represented by the same size space within the house, and that it could be expanded. Anyone could make a panel, and 2 artists helped me to make my panel. So I know from my experience that many people did a lot of research in deciding what they wanted their panel to be about. And one of the main messages was that unless you're Native American, you're an immigrant, and that the United States is a nation of immigrants. And most people in their panels, I would say, express gratitude that their immigrants came under usually dire circumstances, that they were also forced to immigrate, and that we're here because of those ancestors.
Can I say something about One House?
Yeah.
One House was begun about 2 months after Donald Trump took office and the virulent anti-immigrant sentiments started being put into practice. And we ultimately had 300 artists, each of whom made a 12 by 12 inch panel about the journey of their first American ancestor to this country. And we built a house. It was we showed it twice. The first time we showed it was at Touchstone Gallery in downtown DC. We built a house a frame for a house, and we covered it completely with all of the panels. We paneled it. Laura came in as I was laying out all the petals that were coming in on the gallery floor and trying to figure out how, how to put them up. And just sort of shuffling around on the floor. And Laura said, "What's your plan?" She came in to drop hers off. And I looked at her and said, "Plan." So,
What's your concept, Ellen?
Then she said, "Would you like my help?" I said, "Oh, I would really like your help." And then she just spent the next few hours laying them all out. And that's the plan that we followed. It was fabulous. It had a narrative. It was great. So anyway, I wanted to that's how I really first came to know Laura and why I recruited her for this, because I figured it might be equally disjointed and we would really need help pulling it together.
Which brings me to asking the question of Laura. I mean, I think that, because a number of people have asked me this, is how Laura curated a show when we didn't have work for her to curate from. And my explanation has been that maybe we used a curator backwards, possibly. But I don't know. I think that we needed some guidance. And so my question is how you felt the curatorial process went in a show like this.
That's a good question.
Well, as a contemporary curator, I love working with living artists. So I'm not the kind of curator who just works with objects that have no say in the process. I like the evolution of an exhibit like this. I like working with artists who we're already working together, but that I can add this sort of third leg of the triangle. And to me, it's all about the exhibit, making the exhibit really come together and look as good as it possibly can. So no matter how collaborative artists are, they're always sort of thinking about their own work. And, I definitely have to include this. I can't leave that out. And so it can be helpful, hopefully, Sondra and Ellyn will agree, to have a third party come in and say, well, we have to arrange, we have to create narratives, we have to help the viewer to navigate this exhibit by creating sort of strains, themes that people will be able to pick up on. And this part is way too crowded, and we're going to have to take some things out. And it's hopefully that's the helpful job that a curator can play.
I always saw you as the tiebreaker, but Sondra didn't love that too much.
Well, I think at this point we can invite the audience to ask a few questions.
I'm interested in how you thought through the challenge of making this into individuals or human beings when you've got, with the exception of these two windows, people without faces. And with empathy, it's so much easier to empathize with humans with faces. So how did you manage to think through when people would have just very abstract forms and when they would have more human qualities?
Well, some of it was just the material, the challenge of the media, because these people here are stencils. They don't have faces, and I find it a challenge to put emotion into those figures without faces. I think you can do it with, gestures. I mean, that guy's got, he's got emotion, and I think we did our best. Yeah.
I think we actually discussed quite a bit whether the people on the windows would have faces. That's an interesting question, because at one point we were very concerned that the original idea was that these people would cover the entire window surface. And when we discussed it, they would be too big. And we thought that they would be looming over the audience.
They'd be threatening.
And that they would be threatening. And so would we turn their backs to us? Would that be one way to approach it? And then they would be like the stencils without faces? But we determined that we wanted them to be human-sized. So we sized them specifically so that if you stand next to them, you're pretty much at eye level with these people. And I mean, I'll speak on Ellen's behalf in this case. She struggled with these drawings, and they were the very last thing that we finished on the art side, because it was a challenge to make the faces that would work. And I would say she would send me a picture, and I'd say, keep doing them, and keep doing them. We didn't use all the drawings that she made, but it was a matter of keep at it. You're going in the right direction. You just need to keep drawing these people. And I think that that really helped. And it was one of the reasons that we also included the digital work. The people are an important part of the digital piece, so that we would have people that you could see their faces. There are a series of silk screens on this back wall that you'll see, and they also have people with faces. So that's a great question.
I'd like to follow up on something, on your discussion about people coming to the exhibit and their reactions. I assume it's purely coincidence that your exhibit is up at the same time as the Holocaust survivors' progeny art is. And so that must lead to some interesting overlap of people coming to see one and staying to see the other.
I'm sure it's not coincidence on the museum administrator's part, but it certainly wasn't something that we knew. I mean, we asked what other shows would be here at the time, and we were given some and it went right by us, and I think we recognized some of the artists, we knew that, but we didn't know, and it's been a delight to be able to promote that show. And if you haven't had an opportunity, it's on the 3rd floor, and it's an exquisite show about the loss that we experience as human beings.
I just think it makes both of them so much more resonant, and I think we're really fortunate to have that upstairs. Yeah, it's a great show. You could go see it.
Any other questions? Well, we have time for the artist to kind of wrap up a little bit. So having gone through this long process of assembling the exhibit, what do you hope that visitors are taking away, or will take away?
You go first.
If you haven't had an opportunity to go to our website, thehumanflood.com, please do visit. We've put a lot of resources there. There are books that we recommend if you're interested in this topic. You can order books directly off of our website. You can listen to the audio piece. There are links to articles that we've been collecting over the past couple of years that deal with this. And I think that we hope that you do what you can. You know, Laura asked us at what point, and you can see it if you look at the catalog. We included an interview in the catalog. And Laura at one point said, how do you have hope after doing this? And both of us were like, we're hopeless. And I think that, you know, Ellyn can speak to the fact that on the scientific side, there is hope. On the humanitarian side, I think we need to do a lot more work. We need to solve the homelessness crisis or the unhoused citizen crisis. We need to do a better job at bringing people who are marginalized to have better services. We need to make immigration work throughout the world. And we need to help each other along as humans. That's really the only thing we're on this earth for such a short time to do.
Okay. Well, as Sondra said, the science side, the technical side, is actually the more soluble. I have been associated with the Union of Concerned Scientists on the board for 35 years. And they're very active in this issue. It's a national and international organization. I see all over the world people working on the solutions to the technical problems. How do we stop burning fossil fuel? How do we make the conversion? How do we do all of the technical things that are required for us to stop making this problem worse? The problems, the insoluble, the intractable, the most difficult problems are the human problems. And I think they're summed up in this exhibit. There is no leader, really, of any nation in the world that I know about, maybe the Dalai Lama, but he doesn't lead a nation, who's prepared to do the kind of work, starts with the human heart, that's necessary to accept that we have started in motion a movement, a set of effects that require us to step up and take responsibility. And this issue is so easily manipulated by politicians and is being manipulated all over the world, not just in the US. It seems to be political suicide to really ask for a reimagining of where we all belong in this world. That's the part that I find so difficult. And this may be the last climate change show that I do, because I do not see yet a pathway out of this. How do we go forward? And I hope that you all start to think about it. I don't mean to bring you all down, but think about how we approach the human dimensions, of this, and start talking about it. Thank you for coming.
On that inspiring note, thank you all for being here today.